So hello, I want to thank you once again for joining us for our webinar today on plagiarism, paraphrasing, and substantiation. So my name is Carlos Jimenez. I'm the manager of Writing Support Services here with Gina Meister. If you'd like to say hello, Gina.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Great. Yeah. And so before we start, just wanted to give a brief overview about our services if you aren't familiar with them. I did want to just share my screen, and I'll drop this link to our homepage here in the chat so that everybody has that. So here is the link to our writing support homepage, and I'll share my screen. And I just wanted to share a few of our primary resources that we have here at Writing Support. So this is our homepage, the link that I dropped in the chat. And here you can find the WC online system. So if you click on this link, this will take you to our two schedules where you can access our writing support team members. If you would like a consultation on your paper or just the instructions, just brainstorming all the way up to a draft, you can use this consultation schedule. Or you can also submit your paper for written feedback. So you will need to register with your Pepperdine email and your campus ID. But once you are registered, you can see there are these two schedules. And you're encouraged to utilize our consultations with any one of our review team. You'll see I'm on there, Gina Meister's on there as well. Also our graduate assistant team of writing reviewers. So we do have availability on the weekends and the evenings. So encourage you to take advantage of that. And we also have the written feedback schedule. So the written feedback schedule would be if you can't meet on a day or time with one of our writing support team, but you would like some feedback on a draft that you have ready. So you would need to have a draft to upload to these spaces. And the associated writing reviewer will provide some written feedback in about 1 to 2 days from that slot that you uploaded the paper. So we also have some resources and some recorded webinar content on our videos page. So definitely take advantage of these resources. You have the Turnitin project site. You have Grammarly as a GSCP student. Many other different resources here available, as well as some video content. So just like this recording today will be posted shortly after it has been finished, we also upload, you can find all of these other previously recorded webinars available to you. So I just wanted to briefly share some of those primary resources, but we'll go ahead and get started with our presentation here. And I have a PowerPoint presentation that we will also share with you along with the recording to all those that have RSVP'd. All right, so I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen again. And we'll go ahead and get started here. And if you have any questions for those that are online, feel free to type in the chat or raise your hand, or we'll also have some time at the end of the presentation for you to ask any questions about any of the content here. Okay, so let me get the slideshow. So yes, today we'll be talking about 3 different areas of writing, in particular plagiarism, also elements of paraphrasing, and substantiation. So there are our writing support team, Gina and myself here. So our session objectives will first focus on plagiarism. So understanding plagiarism, having a clear definition, being able to identify types of plagiarism as well as avoid them. And then we'll shift to paraphrasing. So we'll discuss some helpful tips and tools and steps for doing that actual paraphrasing. And then we will end with substantiation. So we'll look at ways to determine which ideas require evidence and also identify that adequate evidence when we're presenting those claims. So first, in terms of a general understanding of plagiarism, and some of this might seem straightforward and obvious, right? But it is important to make sure that we are all aware of just understanding what consists of plagiarism. So in this beginning part of the presentation, we will look for a clear definition of plagiarism. We will also identify some particular types of plagiarism. Gina will also talk about patch writing and similarity scores and understanding, how that integrates into the plagiarism, and also ways that we can avoid instances or even unintended instances of plagiarism. So first we'll provide, a clear definition. This is from APA. So in the words of the American Psychological Association, the APA manual that many of you might be familiar with, it provides a clear definition when it states, plagiarism is the act of presenting the words, ideas, or images of another as your own. It denies authors or creators of content the credit they are due. So it's really a matter of attributing, that credit to those sources when we integrate them into our writing, right? So it's essentially using someone else's words or ideas as your own without giving that proper credit to the original author. So some consequences, right, regarding plagiarism. It can result in some serious consequences, right? If it's detected, maybe at bare minimum, you might fail the assignment or be asked to revise or redo the assignment. You might even fail the course, or maybe placed on academic probation, or you might be dismissed. So you'll notice, in every syllabus that you have for your classes, there is a statement on plagiarism outlining those specific guidelines and consequences. It could also be associated with doctoral dissertation work, right? So if you have a published doctoral dissertation, maybe the writer's doctoral degree may be revoked, or you may be, required to rewrite the dissertation. Or in the professional context, there may be manuscripts that are rejected, or even, job loss as a result of, plagiarism there. So some types of plagiarism, right? So plagiarism can maybe come in the form of borrowing the ideas without giving credit. Maybe it's language or wording that we're borrowing, the specific language without giving credit, or even our own work, right? So there is those instances of what we would consider self-plagiarism, and that would be if we're using work from another class or something else that we have gotten published without really explicit permission from the instructors. That is going to be considered self-plagiarism. So we really want to avoid those instances. We might use those same ideas or same sources, but it really needs to be restructured and rephrased in something new there, right? And so it does exist kind of on a spectrum here. There are relative degrees, right? From, things that are obviously intentional to maybe some unintentional, some accidental instances. And so Gina is going to focus on some of those different instances.
Thank you, Carlos. So we'll talk a little bit about accidental plagiarism, and those are things like misspelling an author's name in a citation, or citing a source within the text, but then failing to add it to the reference page, or failing to add all elements to the references on the reference page. So those seem like, they're pretty minor compared to a bigger claim of plagiarism, but they're things to just be mindful of. And they could still result in points being deducted, especially if a professor is, very particular about wanting everything just so. And graduate level, they may take points off for something missing from the references. But overall, this would be considered accidental plagiarism where there's not malintent. So we'll go on to the next slide. And then there's intentional plagiarism, and that is a bit more problematic. So here's some examples of intentional plagiarism. Any text that's copied directly from another source and then pasted into your own paper, and then not provided with quotation marks and not provided with a citation. anytime that you've used someone else's photographs or tables or screenshots, if those are not cited, those also are considered plagiarized. And then, of course, using the work of a tutor or friend or colleague, or someone to either help write your paper or reusing a paper is considered intentional plagiarism. So those are some examples of that. And so let's talk a little bit about similarity scores. One of the ways to find out if you've inadvertently plagiarized is to use Turnitin. And we have a free access to Turnitin through writing support. And you can sign up for it. It's Turnitin, it's through the courses site. And you can submit your papers from your classes there confidentially, and then check your scores and then correct any areas that may be problematic that are highlighted and saying they're a match. What you might see is if you have a sentence and maybe everything is highlighted but one or two little words, that would be considered patch writing. And so you would have a higher similarity score if you have a lot of those things going on. Um, and so things like there are other softwares as well, like Authenticate. Grammarly has a plagiarism detection program in it, but Turnitin is the one that we highly recommend because it has access to almost everything out there that scholars use. So its score is going to be much more accurate than the others. The software will determine what percentage of the text is actually plagiarized, is not quoted and is copied word for word. So the higher the similarity score, the more serious the consequences if your professor is asking you to submit your paper to Turnitin. So we recommend that you don't have a similarity score any higher than 10%. And even then, you still have to look really closely at your sentences to make sure that nothing is just copied and pasted in there. So let's talk a little bit about patch writing. Patch writing is substituting just a few words in a sentence that is the original of the author. So it would maybe in that case, it's not completely thoroughly paraphrased. So in this case, the writer would copy and paste wording into their paper and then maybe just tweak a few words. So that usually results in a paraphrase that's too close to the original, and then it's considered plagiarism. So that tends to happen a little more often than students are aware of. And that's one of the reasons that we like to do this workshop, is to just make you aware that these are some things that could happen and that that's considered plagiarism, even if you're not aware of it. So we want to make sure everyone's aware of that. So we'll go to the next slide, and then Carlos is going to talk about how to paraphrase.
Great. Yeah. So kind of transitioning to having, an understanding of what consists of plagiarism, how to identify it, and using some of those tools to detect. We really, want to focus on the aspects of paraphrasing, right? Because that is really, restating those ideas into your own words, or even maybe another previous published work or paper that you've written, right? We're still restating those ideas and that text into our own words. And, APA mentions that it is an effective strategy because it allows you to kind of summarize and synthesize that information from one or more sources. You can focus on that significant information. You can also compare and contrast relevant ideas, right? So we want to paraphrase when the ideas in a passage may be important, but the language may not be key to the discussion, or it may be difficult for readers to understand, right? So many times when academics write for their peers, they draw on the specialized vocabulary of their disciplines to make their arguments. When you paraphrase, you are helping your readers, right, by providing a translation for those who do not maybe speak the language or use the language that's more in keeping with what you want to convey. So it's also very helpful for you as the writer doing that process of paraphrasing, right? You are kind of retaining more of that information in your memory, rather than just kind of copying and pasting the text or taking just the language directly from the source. So kind of we'll go through a few of these steps to writing a paraphrase, kind of maybe taking us back to some of those early, education with kind of understanding grammar and sentence structure. We'll look at a few ways that will help us to, construct a successful paraphrase. What's very important is making sure that we understand what we're reading, right, before we can actually do that paraphrasing. So making sure that we identify any, key words, phrases, or ideas the writer uses, and we want to think of, some other ways to state them. Also rereading kind of what led up to the passage to make sure that we have the right context. That's important, right? It's making sure that we have clear comprehension of what we're reading before we can begin to re-articulate it, right? So some helpful tips, kind of what we were referring to, what Gina was referring to, patch writing. We want to try to paraphrase that whole section, not really focus on individual sentences, which can lead us to that patch writing. Looking back and forth between the text and your documents. Want to try to limit that, try to avoid that. Looking to read and remember what it says and then trying to say it in a completely different way. Also reordering the sentence, right? Flipping the sentence around if you're just focusing on that single sentence, making, the end, at the beginning and vice versa. You could also integrate, what we call a narrative citation, which is using the author as part of the sentence. And that would also kind of begin the work of kind of restructuring that sentence. We can also take a step back and look at the grammar, right? Looking at the grammatical structure. So kind of thinking back to, like I mentioned, some of our early grammar education, right? By having a solid understanding of the grammatical structure, then we can really begin to be comfortable with moving some of these pieces around and rewording or using synonyms, right? So kind of thinking back to our 8 parts of speech there, right? We have nouns, the pronouns, adjectives, and adverbs. Those parts of the speech are somewhat easier to kind of be able to maneuver. Whereas, the prepositions or conjunctions or articles, those are what we call more of the function words, right? So focusing more on the content words there, then that, can help us to be able to reword and restructure, right? Knowing that nouns can take a plural or singular form. Pronouns are substituting nouns. The adjectives are describing them. Verbs can change with tense, and then adverbs are used to, either modify these adjectives, verbs, or adverbs. So Grammarly actually has a great resource there. They have a blog that breaks down, these parts of speech in more detail. So, if you're interested in kind of getting more detailed understanding there, you can access that resource, and you can also set up a writing consultation if you would like, more of an in-depth kind of tutorial on some of these grammatical concepts. So some continued steps to writing a paraphrase. Making sure that we're identifying, the content words and the function words in the sentence. So here's a breakdown of what we might see. This is more a simplified version here of a sentence, but just an example of how we might want to break down the sentence here, right? So we have the word "the" is considered the article that goes to the noun, which is the video game industry, right? That's one complete noun. Then we have the verb here. Has changed and dramatically there. So just one simplified example of just identifying those different parts of speech, and then we can be more comfortable with restructuring or rewording. Also taking a look at the syntax, or that means, how the words or phrases are arranged in a sentence, right? So keeping in mind that all of our sentences require a subject and a verb, and it's usually going to include one main idea. The traditional order is the SVO, where we have the subject first in the sentence, then the verb, and then there's an object if it's applicable that would come after the verb. And typically we want to place those adjectives or those adverbs in front of the words that they're describing. We know adverbs can be kind of moved around to follow the verb. So an example here, we have another example of the subject verb, and here the superb student is learning to effectively paraphrase. So understanding some of that basic structure of a sentence will really help to give us confidence and be able to move things around, and having the meaning still be conveyed clearly, right, and accurately, true to the original version. Using synonyms, right? We can use synonyms, but we know we can't always just use any of them. We have to be critical about which synonyms that we use. There are some online tools. So if any of you are familiar with the Power Thesaurus, that's a free tool that has many different examples of different synonyms, even in your Microsoft Word software. So if you're using Word, you can kind of select the words and right click, and then there's give you some examples of some synonyms. Also integrating transitional words and phrases of your own, right? So integrating those linking pieces will really help to add to that content and kind of make it your own. So I will drop a link here in the chat on these some examples here. So there's a link there you can access, and we will share the PDF in the along with the recording in our follow-up email. But for example, you might indicate some transitions that are focused on addition, right? So all of these linking pieces would consist of a transition that connects to something that you're adding to the idea, right? And so depending on how you are connecting those ideas, then that would be the appropriate transition would be used, right? Whether we are adding information, or we're providing examples, or maybe we are comparing and contrasting something. So all of those different transitions will depend on how we're connecting the ideas. So having those examples there is helpful to have on hand, so you can make the determination of which transition would be appropriate. So here's an example of some paraphrasing. As we can see here, there's an original version here that we have as an example. And then we have maybe something that would not be appropriate, right? So the first example reads, if the existence of a signing ape was unsettling for linguists, it was also startling news for animal behaviorists. And then we have a possible paraphrase there where we do add a narrative citation, right? So you'll notice Davis 2005. So that is one helpful step there to begin to restate in your own words. But notice the rest of the sentence there. So Davis observed that the existence of a signing ape unsettled linguists and startled animal behaviorists. So this probably looks close to an example of patch writing, right? So where we see maybe there are some words here and there that are different, but in essence, the original version is still there. So we see many, similar words. We see maybe there are some word forms that have been changed, right? Unsettling becomes unsettled, startling becomes startled, but it's still the essence of that original quote there. So it's not enough. It's not quite enough of a paraphrase. But in this last example here, we see that this maybe, you might be using one or two words, but you are essentially really restructuring that sentence, reordering it, and using different language there. So just a small example there of how we might transfer an original quote into an acceptable paraphrase. Okay, another sample quote here, and just the highlighted text, just to give you an idea of how we might begin to paraphrase this example. So notice the first part of the sentence of this paragraph here mentions, in the last decade and a half, the video game industry has changed dramatically. There are more games on the market and a larger variety of ways to play those games. And then we have some evidence there that brings up some recent statistics. So just looking at that highlighted piece, notice the time reference, the last decade and a half, and some of that wording can be, revised in a way that's kind of making it our own, right? So for example, here we have the first sentence restructured there for the past 15 years, right? So instead of a decade and a half, we rephrase it to it's indicating the same thing, right? But we're putting it in different words. The gaming world has significantly shifted, and there you would still want to include a citation, a text citation, right? For instance, an abundance of games has created numerous avenues to engage in electronic sports. Current research confirms nearly 50% of gamers consist of women, and the adolescent males are being surpassed by adult female viewers. So here's an example of ways that you can use statistics and numbers a little bit differently and restructure that in order to really make that idea your own, right? So a lot of students may be hesitant to kind of restructure kind of statistics or some of those things, but there are some ways that you can still do that. All right, so we'll move a little to substantiation, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to Gina, who's going to talk more about that.
Thank you, Carlos. So substantiating claims and ideas in a paper means basically showing that there's evidence for something. So we're going to look at some examples of that. So you want to make sure that when you give information that you substantiate it by giving a citation. Sometimes that's enough. For example, in the sentence below here, in 1984, 15.3% of US adults were unemployed. It seems pretty clear, but we would need to know where the person obtained that information. So if you look down below, all that it would need at the very bottom is just the citation. This is from the US Census Bureau from 1986. So having that information is enough to say, oh, okay, this is from the Census Bureau, so this is believable. So that citation was enough. And now we'll talk a little bit about claims that where a citation may not be enough. So, for example, what kinds of evidence would need to be provided to support the claim below? Or how could that claim be qualified and be made more specific? So let's take a look at that. Women leaders tend to rely on ethics and justice when making decisions. And then we have a citation here. And I'm just going to throw a question out and just have you respond. What might you need to make this more, to make this really clear that there's evidence for this to be true? What kinds of things might be needed here besides just a citation? Any ideas from anyone? And I know everyone's pretty quiet. Okay, so one of the things we want to do is, first, it's a pretty global generalization, right? It's talking about women leaders and that they rely on ethics and justice. So it sounds like a pretty great, very positive generalization, but the problem is when you have positive generalizations, you also can have very negative generalizations. So where did Blake find this? So we'd want to know where this was obtained. How did Blake get to this conclusion that something like this is true, that all women leaders are ethical and just when making decisions? So let's go on to the next slide and talk about that. So we would need to know, one, was there a study done? And which women leaders were they? Or if it is a bigger, if the overgeneralization can be qualified so that they might say women in this particular organization tended to rely on ethics and justice when making their decisions, women leaders in this organization. That might make a little bit more sense, but a really big global claim like that is probably not going to have enough evidence to support it because it's so huge. So just watch for really big global claims like that. Okay, so let's take a look now at these claims and can they be supported and why? Which is adequately supported? So for number one, we have researchers found that secondhand smoke has been shown to have no lasting negative impact on non-smokers. And then we have our citation here. Is this a reliable claim? Is it adequately supported that secondhand smoke has been shown to have no lasting negative impact? And why or why not? And feel free to unmute your mic and respond. Okay. No responses? Okay, well, if we look here at the citation, we have a hint here. Philip Morris, which is a tobacco company, is the one making this claim. So we have to be really careful. If we can go back, Carlos, that would be great. That you cannot rely on certain it has to be a reputable source. So certain sources cannot always be, you can't blanketly trust them to provide adequate information. So kind of you want to look at who that is, what organization is that? And if you find out it's a tobacco company, that could be a conflict of interest there. How about this next one? Women continue to be oppressed around the world. And what might be the problem with this claim? And it's not that we might not agree with it because there's a lot of evidence to show it, but where is the evidence? So that's something that would need to be backed up. This is also Steinem, of course, Gloria Steinem. So you would just need to provide examples, evidence, or make a claim that's much more specific. For example, women in employment around the United States continue to make what percentage of the dollar compared to men's, and then find the exact source that that's from. So you want to make sure that it's qualified enough and specific enough. And then here's an example. The World Health Organization estimates that Alzheimer's disease will affect more than 50% of the US population above the age of 65. This is a very good example of an adequately supported and substantiated claim. It's made by the World Health Organization that collects data from all over the world on health. And so it's a pretty reputable source. And it's very specific about the age and the specific disease. Okay, Carlos, we can go on to the next one. And so you want to just ask yourself when you're looking at information, to see if it's adequately substantiated. Is it based on objective facts that can be verified? And if not, then it probably is based on an opinion or speculation. And would an objective reader be likely to be persuaded by the claim based on the evidence that's provided? So those are two questions that you want to consider asking. And then the third one, of course, is the source reputable? And that can be a little trickier to figure out, but you want to go look at that source and look it up. See if you can find, what is it about this organization that I can find out, or about this person? So I hope that that's helpful in determining kind of how to substantiate claims. And then any questions? I know we covered a lot here during the webinar, but questions that you have about plagiarism and how to adequately paraphrase and substantiate. Okay. Carlos, you were going to drop a link in for an exit ticket.
Yes, and before, I thought while we have some time, maybe just show briefly where students can access the Turnitin project site.
Great.
So while we're here, if we do have a little bit of time, I'll just show you briefly where you can find the courses project site, and which is going to be extremely helpful if you haven't used it already for getting that similarity report and getting that that overview of where those instances might be where you need to either paraphrase more effectively or maybe just quote some of that terminology, right? Some of that specific terminology. So you're going to go to the courses platform, where many of you access your course content for your classes, the courses.pepperdine.edu. And I will just share my screen briefly just to show you where you can access the project site. So after you log in, so I'm already a member. So if you see Turnitin, you'll have to sign up for the 2024 project site. But before you have to join it, so you go into the membership tab. So you'll see here on your home tab, you have a membership tab here, and you will type in the Turnitin GSCP name, Turnitin GSCP WS 2024. And it should, I'm already a member, right? So it won't show up for me, but, and I'm sorry, you do have to click on the joinable sites. So that was one step that I missed. So you do need to make sure that you're in the joinable sites tab. And then that's where you can type in the Turnitin, GSCP 2024 and, any form of that. And it should pop up that you have this site to join. And so once you join it, you'll see it's under your projects list in your sites. Whoops. And I've starred the site, so that way when I open up my courses and I log in, I have it up as a tab here. So and it's just essentially like an assignment list. So there are assignment tabs that you'll see. It looks a little different for me because I'm the admin here. But if I click to student view, then you can see these different slots here that you'll use to upload your document. So you're just looking for an open slot. There are 10 here, but you can use many more. Just contact us if you need us to add assignment spaces. But you'll want to upload your file there and then hit submit a few times, and you'll get a notification that the submission has been officially uploaded, and you'll want to come back and check the status. So you do have to check back on your own. It won't tell you when the report is ready, but once you see it there, you'll go into the assignment tab, and then you'll see here's a sample that you'll see the status there, and you'll look for the flag. So when you see the flag there, then you click on the flag, and then you can view the report there. So it is an in-depth report. It will show you the highlighting. We won't go into too much detail about interpreting the report, but if you do have questions about that, you can always reach out to us in order to get a better idea of how to interpret that report. But you'll get a percentage number, and you'll get highlighted text that's corresponding to whatever sources are out there, in the World Wide Web that are matching with the text that you have in your paper. Right. So very, very helpful tool there that I just wanted to, highlight there. And if you have, any other questions about that, feel free to set up a consultation and we can discuss that further.
Oh, there's a question here, Carlos, from Jacqueline.
Okay.
She says, thank you for your help today. What if you are listing off something? For example, if you want to list off 12 steps. I think that's a great question, Jacqueline. Thank you. So, Carlos, were you able to hear that? So,
Yeah.
yeah. So if you're listing, like, enumerating the steps, and if they're verbatim, you want to make sure that right at the end of that list, you put the author's name, the year, and a page number from there. You may not necessarily need quotes because it might be over 40 words, which would be considered a block quote per APA. So if it's under 40 words, you don't need to put quotes around it, but you want to make sure that you include the page number in your citation, which indicates that that is a direct copy and paste.
Yes.
And then you're good. You're fine with that.
And that, yes,
So
and that
great
citation,
question.
yeah, that citation I was just going to say will come after the final list, the final element in the list, right? So at the end, but because if it is word for word, it's still considered a direct quote, right? So we do need to properly cite that and include the page number there.
Yeah.
Great
Thank
question
you.
there.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Yes, I just struggle with it because a lot of times it's, it's not to where you could do a block quote and then I don't want to put all these quotation marks in the sentence, but I just want to list off. So maybe it's pulling the first few words from 12 different paragraphs.
There
Like
might
that.
there might be ways that you can paraphrase it more and then just cite it without the page number if you've really put it into your own words enough. But if it's so close to the original, I would say just keep it with the original and then just cite it with, the page number at the end there.
Okay.
Or if there are, some of those steps that you're highlighting that are in particular to others, maybe they are more of a focus there where you maybe have in the body paragraph where you elaborate on them, right? And then that's where you can paraphrase. So you can ask yourself, do I need to include all 12 in this whole list? Or, if it does directly apply to what you are discussing, then maybe it is necessary. But that could be another way to help avoid having to necessarily, quote word for word every single step there. But
Okay, thank you.
great question. Sure. So I did leave the link to the form there. If we could just get your feedback. I know only a few of you are here. But yes, if you could take a moment just to complete that feedback form, just a few questions there, that would be very helpful for us so that we can ensure that we are providing you worthwhile content, and we can look to improve these webinars in the future.
Are there any other questions too from people? You're very welcome, Garine. Thank you. Thank you for attending.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us today. We do have another webinar towards the end of the month on APA basics. So if you've registered for that, we'll be sending you some reminders. And as I mentioned, we will share this recording and the PowerPoint and those materials that we shared with the presentation in an email shortly after today to all those who have RSVP'd. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Y'all have a great day.
Okay, bye.